Today we're going to be looking at essay writing using the novel 2 Weeks with the Queen, aimed at a Year 7 audience. There are many ways to write an essay, and this is just one. The question is always important, as is the context in which you write. The following approach uses the topic, explain, evidence and link structure for main body paragraphs, which you probably refer to in class as the teal structure. So let's start with the introduction, and I like to teach students to use a structure with 3 parts to make that paragraph. You're going to lead in with the text, context or idea. You're going to answer the essay question. Say what you think, or if it's not a question that asks for personal voice, indicate the position a reader, viewer, society may take. Have a thesis. What you are going to look at, discuss or argue. Use the words of the question. So what might that look like? Well, here's an example by me, using the question, how has the author constructed the novel to position the reader on an idea? 2 Weeks with the Queen by Maurice Gleitzman is a coming-of-age novel that explores ideas about grief and family through the shaping of the experiences of a young boy sent overseas while his brother dies from cancer. The audience is invited to follow his journey to acceptance of the inevitability of his brother's fate and his own sadness. Gleitzman uses characterization, symbolism and descriptive language to position the novel's young audience to embrace the idea that grief is healthy and necessary when someone you love dies. So as you can see, I tell you that it's 2 Weeks with the Queen by Maurice Gleitzman, and it's looking at ideas about grief and family. I look at the fact that we use Colin as an example in following his journey to accept that the brother's fate is inevitable and his feelings. And then I look at what I'm going to be discussing. Characterization, symbolism and descriptive language. We're going to be positioning the audience on what idea, and all of this relates to the question, the how of the construction, who the author is, what the novel is called, who the readers are, and what the idea is in those 3 parts. Now let's look at main body paragraphs, and you're going to need about 3 to 4. Each one of those paragraphs I think has to have these 4 parts to it that you know as teal. A topic sentence, which is a mini introduction that says how this part of your argument is connected to the overall thesis. An explanation section, which is where you have to clearly explain how your idea answers the question you're writing about. An example section, where you insert an idea from the text or from life or experience, and where you link it back to the thesis and the question, giving it closure. Here is a tip for starting off new paragraphs, because as I said, you're going to need more than one main body paragraph. All of these words are really good for using to show that your paragraphs are connected to each other. So what might one of these paragraphs look like? Again, using the same question as before. I'm choosing what would have been the second point, symbolism, to use as an example, so that I can show you how I use some of those connecting words from the slide before. Furthermore, Gleitzman uses the symbolism of planes to position the audience to understand that Colin is on an emotional journey, as well as being important to Luke, who is obsessed with planes. Planes literally and symbolically remove Colin from his family while his brother dies, causing him distress and denying him the chance to grieve with his family. The act of flying home on one not only shows his readiness to deal with the reality of his brother's death, but also his leaving behind the unrealistic fantasies of being saved by the Queen. It's on the plane home that he finally reads the generic letter from the palace. Colin left it in the ashtray, casually discarding these childish dreams on the journey. His growth completed, he no longer needs them to avoid his feelings. The idea that grief is necessary is the lesson that Colin and the audience have learned by the novel's end. So you start off with what your paragraph is about. You explain it in more detail. You take the example from the novel, and here is the direct quote here, Colin left it in the ashtray. And then you take it back to what it is that we're being positioned to think. You finish your essay with a concluding paragraph, and again I suggest using 3 parts. You answer the question once again, focusing on your main idea. You refer to the most important points again, a bit like you did in the thesis. And you lead out saying something interesting to show you've really thought about the ideas in your essay. You should also be signalling that this is a conclusion by using some of these kinds of words. It just shows the person reading that you're coming to the end. Here's an example by me, again using the same question as before. In conclusion, 2 Weeks with the Queen by Maurice Gleitzman is a funny and relatable coming-of-age novel. Through characterization, symbolism and descriptive language, it encourages us to embrace the idea that experiencing grief is necessary when losing someone you love. While that may seem a very sad lesson, the end of the novel sees Colin and Luke laughing and hugging together as the novel tells us they should be. So again, 3 parts. It's a coming-of-age novel. It looks at this idea, and this is something for us to think about. So let's look at what it would look like all together. You would have an introduction that leads on to your first point, your second point, your third point, each one of these in a paragraph on their own, and then you conclude, making it at least 5 paragraphs altogether. Go back and watch this again if you need to, and ask for help from your teacher if you're still confused.